were even semicolons and colons. The semicolon is not dead. I already knew that I still need to be developing my grammar skills and my punctuation skills. It's just that suddenly I feel really empowered to actually be able to learn and improve. Hey y'all, I'm Angela, and today I want to talk a little bit about punctuation, which is something that I have recently been thinking a lot about. When I was little, I wrote a lot. Like basically from the time that I could read, I was reading constantly and I was writing a good bit. I finished nothing, but I was very enthusiastic. And I was also very good for my age. People would tell me this, but I didn't really understand until I became a teacher and started reading a lot of student work and then was able to go back and look at my work. So particularly around like the time of middle school, I was just a very advanced writer, which I don't think really carries over at all into adulthood. But for my age, I was a very competent writer, and it was one of the few things in my life that I felt like I was good at. Over time, that feeling of being comfortable and confident in my writing really started to wane. By the time I was in college, I saw writing more as something that was really challenging and that I wasn't very good at. And the main reason for that was that I did not feel at all confident around grammar or punctuation. All of this means that as I've gotten back into writing, it's been really important to me to think of sort of grammar and sentence construction as something that I can learn to do, but it's definitely still been a place that I felt uncomfortable. And one of the main sources of my discomfort is that I've really felt like everything that is not something that ends a sentence or a comma is off limits. So that all other forms of punctuation were forbidden, which sounds a bit dramatic, but I have a pretty stark memory from about a week ago of writing something and being like, it's really sad that the semicolon is dead because a semicolon would be useful. And at first I thought it was just something that I'd made up. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that this is actually something that I've been told both explicitly and sort of implicitly is true at various points. So for example, I have this very vivid memory of my mother when I was a kid, and my mom, who is also a writer, was teaching herself to write. And one of the things that she was talking about in her writing was that she used too many em dashes. And because I was like 15, I guess internalized that as you should never use em dashes. So that would be a one-off thing, except then I was talking to my roommate who also was an English major with me in college. And she reminded me that there was a time in one of our classes when one of our professors straight up told us that there was never a need to use a semicolon. So the reason that I thought that the semicolon was dead was because I was told that by my English professor in like very certain terms. But the other day, I was listening to the Writing Excuses podcast, and Brandon Sanderson started talking about how many of his students don't use em dashes. And at first he thought that this was a stylistic choice, but as he started to talk to more and more of them, he realized that a lot of them just didn't know how to use them. And this floored me because I thought that Brandon Sanderson didn't use em dashes because I assumed that em dashes, like everything else, were sort of dead. Now, to be clear, I've used all of this punctuation. I've just felt guilty about it all of the time. Like anytime I've used any sort of punctuation that's not like a question mark or a period or a comma, I've sort of felt like I was getting away with something. Or like if I was a real writer, I wouldn't have to stoop to using something like an em dash. So, heard Brandon Sanderson talk about this. Mind was completely blown, and so I decided to do the thing that is the logical thing, which is to go look at some punctuation in a few books. Starsight, because that's the only one that I currently have in the place where I'm staying. And then I also wanted to look at a couple of other books, so I chose this one by Marie Brennan. And then also I wanted to look at C L Polk's Witchmark, because both Brennan and Polk have written work that when I read it, I was like, oh, I would eventually like to be able to do something similar to this. So that was my reason for choosing these three authors, and I went through mostly the first chapter of each of their books. And I found that everyone is using em dashes. Brandon Sanderson, unsurprisingly, is using quite a lot of them, but so is pretty much everyone else. And they're also using basically all of the other punctuation. I have a list in my little notebook here. So we had ellipses. It varied stylistically, but everyone was using them, some mostly in dialogue, some were using them other places as well. There were even semicolons and colons. The semicolon is not dead. It has been in here this whole time, and I just didn't notice because I was super unobservant. So we've got semicolons, we've got colons, we've got everything. The only thing that was not consistently across all of them was parenthetical phrases, but everything else was being used by everyone. So there was at least one semicolon per chapter for these people. It was usually about that, so let's be real, I'm probably using more semicolons than I ought to be. I already knew that I still need to be developing my grammar skills and my punctuation skills. It's just that suddenly I feel really empowered to actually be able to learn and improve my technical craft in a way that I didn't. And I'm very excited about this. I'm a little embarrassed to talk about it because now that I've actually gone and checked, I feel like it's really obvious, but I wanted to share anyway for a couple of reasons. First, because honestly, this like grammar stuff is fundamental to the part of my life where I stopped writing and stopped thinking of myself as a writer. And then the other reason is that I really think that this is probably a space that a lot of people are in. I think that Brandon Sanderson, when he was identifying this pattern in his students, was identifying a pattern that I've seen in both my friends and then sort of in education, potentially in other places. I do think that the way that grammar is taught has been shifted a lot, and that often now students aren't really getting a lot of formal grammar. And so I think that this is maybe a sort of floundering space that other people are also in. So I wanted to share that as well, because now I feel like I can just learn to use punctuation properly as opposed to feeling as though I was committing some sort of minor crime every time I used a semicolon. Let me know in the comments if you have also experienced grammar or punctuation related struggles, or if you think it's super bizarre that I thought that all punctuation besides the comma was off limits. If you liked this video, please let me know that by hitting the little thumbs up symbol, and if you would like to stick around, I would love it if you would subscribe. That is about it, folks. I'm just gonna go back to screaming about punctuation. Bye, loves. Be well.